presented by Mr. Patrick Quirk, who is a managing partner at Focus Partners. Before we get started and I turn it over to Patrick, we want to just run through a few quick introductory slides. The handouts are available in the handouts feature of GoToWebinar. They'll also be posted to the CSOHIMSS website in the next few days. You look under events and education and then past events. We'll also be posting a link to the recording. And also that recording will be posted to the CSOHIMSS YouTube channel. So you might want to subscribe to that YouTube channel because we post these every month. If you would like to get in touch with the CSOHIMSS web chapter, you can email us at csohio.president or csohio.info@himschapter.org. The website for the chapter can be found at csohio.himschapter.org. Please keep an eye on that website. We post information about all of our upcoming events and information about the board. Some great information there on the chapter website. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We do post a lot of stuff about upcoming events, some information from HIMSS. We try to share a lot and try to be pretty active on our social media. So please follow us, link to us, whatever. We'd like to take this time to thank our sponsors, because without our sponsors, we could not provide these educational opportunities to you, our members. Their sponsors are invaluable. Our premier level sponsors are CoverMyMeds. You can find it at covermymeds.com, Expedient at expedient.com, Ahead at thinkahead.com, Malwarebytes at malwarebytes.com, SignetXcel, signetxcel.com, and EHR Integration Services at ehrintegration.com. I'd also like to thank our elite level sponsors, Metasource, Blue Orange Compliance, Obix Perinatal, Tech Systems, Data Gravity, Redspin, DMI, Time Warner Cable, NTT Data, Excite Health Partners, Leidos, and Winthrop. Centricom, ServiceNow, and Sagacious Consultants. Thank you, thank you, thank you to all of our sponsors. I'd also like to share some information on our upcoming events. We are working to finalize our fall conference. Right now we are looking at October 7th. Probably going to be at UC Health down in Cincinnati. We haven't finalized our topic yet, but we're leaning towards MACRA, payment reform. We would love to hear what you, our members, would like our fall conference to be about. And again, it's not set in stone yet. So the date, the subject matter, and even the location may be subject to change, but every day we get a little closer to locking things down. We do have quite a few Lunch and Learn webinars scheduled. We try to do these every month. Next month, we will have a webinar on enabling actionable real-time data through cloud analytics as a service. This will be presented by Joanne White, the CIO, and Mark Gershutz, the Director of IT at Wood County Hospital. You must pre-register for this event, and you'll see we have the link here that you can pre-register. In August, we will have a webinar on privacy and security in healthcare, What You Need to Know, presented by Mr. John DiMaggio, who is the CEO and founder of Blue Orange Compliance. The September Lunch and Learn will be EHR conversion and data storage best practices. This would be great for those organizations out there that are transitioning from one EHR vendor to another. October, we're still working on the topic and theme, but Dave Billiter from SignetXcel will be our presenter. November, same thing, working to tie down our topic. Malwarebytes will be our presenter. In December, the topic will be how can we enhance our end users' experience, a pragmatic approach to improving provider and clinical end user login times. John Flamand from Lockbridge will be our presenter. We love it when our members present for our Lunch and Learn webinars. If you have a story you'd like to share, if you are an expert in a field, we would love if you, our members, would be a presenter for our Lunch and Learn webinars. We are working on scheduling our 2017 series. We're going to have one of these every month. So if you are interested in speaking, please contact any of the board members. Let them know. We'll get you the documentation, the information that you need, because we really want this to be more from our membership. So with that, I will now be turning it over to our speaker, Mr. Patrick Quirk, who I have to unmute and make the presenter. Say hi, Patrick. Hey, Patrick, are you there?
Can you hear me, Scott?
We can hear you, buddy. The floor is yours. You should have a button to share your screen.
All right. Do you have my slides up?
Perfect.
All righty. Good afternoon, everyone. I won't bore you all by kicking things off with talking about my personal bio. I'll instead start with a rhetorical question for you. If just as this webinar was kicking off, you all received the phone call, the email, you got a text message where someone in your organization was letting you know that they think that you just had a HIPAA breach. How many of you feel like your organization would know exactly what to do to respond to that breach? Would your marketing folks know that they have a role? Consider whether your IT staff would know how to contain that breach. Would your legal staff know the legal reporting requirements that are associated with that breach? Consider whether your CFO would know what the likely cost to the organization would be. If you answered no to most of these, don't worry, you are not alone. Very few in the healthcare organizations are prepared in this way, and I'll share with you my reason, my theory for why that is. Most in healthcare don't make the association as to why data security and privacy and thus data breaches are important to the objectives of the organization. So let's consider these first couple of slides that I've got for you as prerequisites for the best practices we'll cover today, as they will help you not only become a better communicator, but also help inspire those throughout your organization as to why data security and breach preparation is important for the organization. Many of you may be familiar with Simon Sinek's TED Talk and subsequent book, Start With Why. His basic premise is that ideas are more inspiring than facts and figures. If Mr. Sinek's premise holds true, you may find that the ways that you talk with your coworkers and leadership team can be improved in ways that will allow you to inspire them to make information security, including incident response, part of your organization's culture. Everyone working in healthcare, everyone has some level of responsibility for data security and compliance. They also often have a personal passion in one of these areas on your screen. Most working in healthcare don't make the connections or understand these the connections between these personal motivators and data security and privacy. So let's take just a couple of minutes to discuss who in your organization may be motivated by each one of these. Your chief financial officer and other senior leadership are often motivated by helping the organization maintain a financially viable status. They want to make sure that they keep the doors open. When individuals in these roles learn powerful ways to reduce risk, it gets their attention. Now, incident response and breach preparation is such a tool which comes as a surprise to many in leadership roles. We'll talk about some of these financial impacts and how effective incident response programs reduce risk throughout the webinar today. Patient trust and healthy outcomes are linked in my mind and can often inspire those who have a clinical background. A 2015 study found that over 50% of patients withhold some level of personal information from their healthcare provider due to data security concerns, which represents a clear link between patient trust and quality of care. We'll also spend some time today exploring how a strong incident response program can build patient trust and impact healthy outcomes. Not surprisingly, these factors also have connections to the financial motivators that we mentioned previously. The last motivator to keep in mind today is that some, especially those in IT security, are inspired by simply fighting the good fight and keeping the bad guys out. You may be surprised by how many of your IT staff, especially those in IT security, share this motivation and respond to it significantly stronger than other motivators. As we go through today's presentation, I'm going to challenge you to be thinking about these whys and how you can use them to inspire others within your organization about incident response when you return to the office. We'll start the facts and figures by looking at some recent health data breach trends. Our friends at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Civil Rights have tracked health data breaches on their website since 2009. Since that time, data breaches involving over 150 million individuals have been reported to the OCR, and that should let you know that is as the end of 2015. While that number is significant in itself, watch your screen to see what has happened in 2015. The number of individuals impacted by health data breaches is now about 4 times what it was at the end of 2014. This jump has been fueled by some very large breaches. Excellus Health Plan was 10 million, UCLA Health was 4.5 million, Premera Blue Cross was 11 million, and Anthem was the whopping 78.7 million. Obviously, Anthem is the largest contributor to the number of individuals impacted, but even if we remove Anthem from the count, we still see a 3 times increase over 2014. So as we go through today's slides, you'll hear stories from these large breaches, and we'll discuss how such breaches are having a direct impact on security and compliance expectations for the healthcare industry. You'll also see that Who's Why icon several times today to remind you to think about who within your organization may be motivated by this information. In this case, who within your organization would be motivated by the significant increase in the number of individuals impacted by health data breaches? Our number 2 trend looks at the rate of increase for reported data breaches. Given the significant increase in the number of individuals impacted by data breaches in 2015, you may be surprised to see that the raw number of breaches reported is not keeping pace with the number of individuals impacted. In fact, the rate of increase for reported breaches seems to have actually reached a new plateau. So with 2 interesting trends with very dissimilar trajectories, what's this data telling us? Well, when you consider that the number of patients impacted is skyrocketing and the number of breaches reported is leveling out, basic mathematics tells us that the average number of patients affected per breach incident is jumping. Putting it another way, the average number of patients affected per breach in 2014 filled Great American Ballpark, home of the Cincinnati Reds. Now, this may be my favorite visualization in the deck for you all today. For 2015, you would need 12 major league ballparks to find a seat for the number of individuals affected by the average healthcare data breach. Let's watch that again just because I really enjoy this visualization. Go from 2014 needing 1 major league ballpark to 2015 you need 12 major league ballparks to have a seat for everyone in the average healthcare data breach. For those of you who prefer a line graph to a stadium graph, we can see that for 2015 the average number of patients affected per breach reflects a similar jump to what we saw in our first trend for the total number of patients affected. One last chart for you on 2015 healthcare data breach trends. The number of breach incidents impacting 500,000 or more individuals has doubled each of the past 3 years. Breaches of this size still represent less than 5% of the breach incidents, but account for over 95% of the individuals impacted. So numbers, charts, trends, and math are all great, but so what? Does any of this matter to the average organization in the healthcare industry? For most organizations, that boils down to a question of how, if at all, it impacts their core mission and or the bottom line. We'll touch on the core mission impacts a bit later, but the most direct impact for many organizations is financial. In a 2015 international study sponsored by IBM, the Ponemon Institute found the average cost of a healthcare data breach is $363 per exposed personally identifiable record. As you can see in the table on your screen, the cost of a breach to your organization can be significant even if you don't have millions of records. I'd like to give a little disclaimer here. Please don't take the dollar values in the table as expected actuals for a given breach incident size, but consider them as estimating the likely level of impact which may be experienced. The study found that the cost of an individual breach was driven by a number of factors. In fact, they found that the math for breaches impacting over 100,000 individuals begins to shift just due to the scale. Interestingly, the average cost in the 2015 report is only about a 1% increase over the $359 identified in the 2014 report. And this leads us to our number 3 trend. While the impact of health data breaches is increasing, organizations are maturing their security practices. The Ponemon Institute identified factors which are pushing the cost of breaches higher, but also identified factors which are helping to lower the cost of a breach. We'll highlight 3 of the factors the Ponemon Institute identified as driving the cost higher first. The first factor is that the percentage of attacks which are criminal in nature is increasing. Crime-based breach incidents are still slightly below half of all breaches, but it is on the rise. This is significant because the Ponemon Institute found that the average cost of a crime-based breach is higher than other breaches. Now, it would be fun if we could blame this phenomenon purely on lawyers, but while their involvement in criminal attacks does increase the cost of a breach, it isn't the only factor. Often the investigation performed for a criminal attack is more intensive due to maintaining chain of custody and sophisticated forensics examinations. In short, if you want to prosecute someone related to a breach, you have to do a lot more work to be able to prove your case. Folks often ask how criminals are using health data. You may already be aware that a 2014 FBI bulletin identified the value of a valid credit card on the black market as $1. That same bulletin identified the value of a health record as $50. When you consider a small breach of only, say, 1,000 records, the motivation for criminals is obvious. The most common criminal uses of this data currently is for identity theft. Medical records contain a great deal of your personal information and often includes your personal history. Criminals often aren't as interested in the clinical information today as they are your name, your personal identifiers such as social security number, your address or your address history, your physical characteristics, and so forth. Each of these are useful in some form of identity theft. Some of the less common but emerging ways to monetize this data are in areas for predatory sales and marketing. Consider how data about who had recent procedures could be leveraged by unscrupulous pharmaceutical distributors outside of the U.S. or medical device distributors, malpractice or class action lawyers. This data could be a marketing boon to many of those types of organizations. Another use of the data aligns with the trend for attacks becoming more targeted and sophisticated is blackmail. Several years ago, UCLA was one organization which had a different type of breach. Their employees were regularly viewing records of celebrities without being involved in their care. In one case, they even had a staff member view records of an ex-girlfriend's current boyfriend and share those records with his ex. You combine this concept with what we saw with some of the efforts related to the Ashley Madison breach last year, where groups were offering not to publish your personal information if you paid them a fee. It isn't hard to see criminal organizations taking a similar approach with sensitive health information. The bottom line here is that just as with any business, organized crime will continue to develop ways in which it can monetize the data. A second factor, and possibly the most interesting, is that patient-client churn is higher for organizations after a data breach than the same organization had prior to the breach. That means that consumers are actually paying attention to data breaches and changing their provider decisions as a result. Let me say that again because it aligns with consumerization of healthcare concepts and may well have the biggest impact on cost over the long term. Consumers are actually paying attention to data breaches and changing their provider decision as a result. You combine that Ponemon finding with a study by the publication Software Advice, which found that 54% of individuals are very likely or moderately likely to switch providers after a security breach. So let's pause to think about those whys again. Think about those individuals in your organization most strongly driven to improve outcomes. Do you think that they aware of the findings linking data breaches to patient behaviors such as these? The third factor highlighted today is that detection and escalation costs are increasing for HIPAA data breaches. At some level, this is deceptive because the industry is lagged far behind IT security programs, processes, tools, and infrastructure compared to other industries. Healthcare is increasing their investment in areas of detection and response as part of that maturation process, which is driving these costs up today. At some point, a balance of investment with return on investment will be achieved, which this will take us to those factors which are helping organizations drive the financial impact of their breach incidents lower. I find this information to be some of the most valuable in the Ponemon study because it helps us tell the return on investment story for allocating resources to improving IT security. The dollar amounts that you see in parentheses on your screen reflect the average amount organizations saved by having that factor in place compared to organizations which didn't have that factor. For example, an organization having extensive use of encryption reduced the cost of their data breach by $12 per individual impacted. Now, the full list of factors that are available in the Ponemon study, but we've highlighted 7 of them for you here. And since we are discussing incident response and breach preparation today, be sure to note where having an incident response team and plan in place falls on the list. It is considered to be the strongest factor for reducing the cost of a breach. All right, so we're going to shift gears a little bit here. So far we've talked about the whys, the motivators for incident response, and covered some statistics on recent health data breach trends. So let's move into discussing what these trends mean for healthcare organizations. A key concept for what these trends mean for your particular organization is the concept of reasonable measures. I find that many are unfamiliar with the concept of reasonable measures, so allow me to spend a minute on what that phrase means. HIPAA has differed from some other security regulations in that it has not been very prescriptive. For example, PCI covers credit cards and has some very specific technical requirements, whereas HIPAA has relied upon judgment as to what constitutes reasonable measures. The spirit of this flexibility allows organizations to do what makes sense for their particular risk. So a regional medical center would have a different expectation for what is reasonable compared to a rural ambulatory hospital. To date, organizations which have had to face the scrutiny of federal eyes have benefited from this flexibility because the industry as a whole has had comparatively low standards for what reasonable measures are compared to other industries. One area in which expectations for reasonable measures is rising is incident response, which is exactly why we selected it as a webinar topic for today. So here's a quick example of the concept of reasonable measures for you. That Ponemon study determined that the average organization takes approximately 6 months to identify that a breach took place and to contain the breach. In many cases, the identification step was the lion's share of that duration. It is common that the organization isn't even the entity that often identifies the breach. In most cases, it is an external entity such as the media or law enforcement. In terms of reasonableness, I think we can all agree that these averages are not reasonable standards for the industry and that we can make significant improvement here. Two of the most common recommendations for determining what is reasonable for a particular organization is to look at what your peers are doing and any enforcement action the OCR has imposed for similar organizations. So today we are covering some trends that are impacting the healthcare industry at all levels. And while we won't be telling you exactly what level is reasonable for specific types of organizations, for example, a health plan versus a physician office, but if you would like to chat about what is currently seen as reasonable for your type of organization, please do submit some questions or feel free to contact me after the presentation via the contact information on the last slide of today's deck. And I'll be happy to talk about any particular specific organization concerns that you have. Our first trend in reasonableness is that we actually are seeing a raising of the bar for what is considered reasonable at all levels of organization. This is thanks to those organizations which have experienced the very large breaches. In addition to the breach notifications that these large organizations have had to perform, they also face scrutiny from the media and various government entities looking into not just why the breach took place, but how the organization responded to that breach. The lessons learned, both positive and negative, from these large breaches are setting new standards for what is expected throughout the industry, especially for incident response. The most obvious trend specific to incident response and breach preparation is that now incident response is expected to be an organization-wide effort. The large organizations that have experienced these mega breaches are showing us how important it is to have more than IT involved with incident response for a HIPAA breach. These large organizations often have entire departments dedicated to specific functions, but the expectation is filtering down to smaller organizations where one person may serve multiple functions. It then becomes a matter of scale as to what is reasonable to perform. As a result, gone are those days where incident response can be considered just an IT issue. The primary driver for that is the financial impacts organizations are feeling as a result of breaches and how powerfully effective incident response is at reducing the cost of a breach. We mentioned this trend earlier, but wanted to highlight it again because it is one of the key factors driving organizations to treat incident response as an organization-wide initiative. A factor which may have surprised you in the list earlier is that organizations which involve their board of directors when they experience a data breach actually reduce the financial impact of the breach to the organization. The main reason is that it means organizations are taking the breach incident seriously at the highest levels. When organizations establish a culture where IT security is important, the organization will become more effective and efficient at protecting data and responding to incidents. It may not be coincidental that having a CISO appointed has a very similar financial impact. We also mentioned earlier that patients are changing their provider decisions after notice of a breach. This trend may have the largest financial impact on organizations as lost patients are a significant blow not just to the lost future revenue from that patient, but for potential compounding as the organization's reputation takes a hit compared to other local providers. Employees make the list for organization-wide response for both some positive and negative reasons. Employees are still the most likely source of a breach, whether it be malicious in nature or unintentional. For this reason, a huge trend is for organizations to engage employees as frontline defenders from incidents and recognizing the value they can bring in terms of identifying and reporting incidents. In fact, the Anthem breach of 78 million records, the largest health data breach on record, was the result of employees not recognizing an email as malicious. It is reported that only 5 of all of Anthem's employees fell for this particular phishing attack, but of those 5, at least 1 was a system administrator. If these employees had been able to identify the email they received as malicious and reported it as an incident, the subsequent incident response may have been able to prevent the breach. To go a step further, If any Anthem employee who received the email had identified it as malicious and was able to report it to an incident response team, that team may have been able to prevent the breach even if other employees had fallen for that malicious email, if their incident response process was sophisticated enough. Having an incident response plan may seem obvious, especially for this presentation, but is actually a trend in healthcare because many organizations have not had a security incident response plan in place. One reason this is changing is that reporting requirements for breaches is becoming increasingly complex. If you experience a HIPAA breach, chances are that the OCR is only one of several government entities to which you will need to report the breach. Laws at the state and local levels aimed at consumer protection will likely apply for each state in which the breach took place, or potentially even where the patient lives, even if you don't have a facility there. In some cases, a breach may occur even if it wasn't EPHI, but a state or local regulation around personally identifiable information applies. So maybe that you just, some records were disclosed that just had first name, last name, and maybe address on them. No health information. That may still be considered a breach for certain regulations. At the federal level, if you lose consumer financial data or any personally identifiable information, even if it isn't health information, agencies such as the FTC or the CFPB may come calling. Depending upon your organization's geographic presence, there may be dozens of different local, state, and federal reporting requirements. Further complicating the reporting is that different regulations may require you to perform notification to patients in different ways. Having a plan defined in advance that spells out how notifications and reporting must be performed for various jurisdictions is a must if you're going to perform those tasks in a timely manner. The complexity of this reporting is one of the reasons the Ponemon study that found that the #1 way to reduce the cost of a breach is to have an effective incident response plan in place. In addition to reporting complexity, having an incident response plan that not only addresses notification, but how you clean up from an incident can be the difference between an incident and a breach. Take UCLA Health as an example again. Unusual activity was first detected by UCLA in October of 2014, only a month after it began. They started an investigation which identified that no EPHI had been accessed and the investigation was closed. However, their investigation and cleansing process didn't go far enough because they failed to uncover a backdoor that the attacker had left. This backdoor was utilized in May of 2015 and detected by UCLA in June, again about 1 month later. This time there was the ability for the attacker to access EPHI. So had UCLA's response activities been different in October of 2014, their subsequent breach in 2015 of 4.5 million records may not have even occurred. All right, time for another brief pause as we shift gears again. By now you should be getting a sense of what is trending in healthcare data breaches, so let's transition to talking about some best practices to address these breaches. As we make this transition, please do keep in mind that if you have specific questions for your particular organization or how to apply best practices to your organization, please submit those via the question box or reach out to me after the presentation. We often hear the terms incidents and breaches interchangeably in the media, but understanding the definition of each is critical to incident response. A security incident is any number of things which violate a security policy for a particular organization. A breach is the inappropriate release of protected or confidential data. In short, this matters because breaches are where regulatory requirements come into play. A best practices incident response program will define how the organization will respond to both security incidents and breaches. While incidents will occur more frequently than breaches, the work associated with responding to a breach is more involved. One goal of a best practices incident response plan is, when possible, to contain security incidents before they turn into breaches. Both incidents and breaches can be paper or electronic, but while breaches are specific to records, an incident may involve physical locations or devices where records are located. An incident may occur with such physical equipment or locations without records actually being accessed. As you can see in the last row of the table, a security breach requires the same responses tasks as does an incident, but it adds the notifications and regulatory reporting tasks. It is also likely that the investigation, remediation, and risk mitigation for the breach will be more complex than for just a security incident that does not involve a breach. Now I know this is a bit of an eye chart for you all, and this wasn't intended to be a how-to, more just as a demonstration of the types of decision process an organization must perform in order to determine whether an incident is a breach. So keep in mind that a HIPAA breach is only one type of breach that your organization may face. So you may have a similar sort of decision tree for various types of regulations that may apply to your organization. Each regulation, HIPAA included, has specific definitions for what a breach is and when notification is required. In many cases, while you may indeed have a breach, notification may not be required. Obviously, having such decision trees documented in advance removes confusion during the response process. It also gives clear opportunities for doing tabletop exercises or other forms of training and preparing staff involved in incident response. Such a decision tree should receive inputs from your incident risk assessment, and thus that incident risk assessment process should be designed to provide the information required to make a breach, no breach decision. One example here in step 2, which you may not probably be able to read, is so this organization has identified that they actually have had a breach, and it is a HIPAA breach. But their step 2 says determine if PHI was unsecured or limited in some way, shape, or form. Sounds like could be a pretty straightforward question, but a lot of organizations may have gone through the process to, say, encrypt their laptop. So if a laptop is lost or stolen, that they can say that that laptop was secured and the data on that laptop was secured. Thus, maybe they don't have to actually do their breach notifications. We won't go into the specifics of these particular links on your screen today, but these links will be available in the slides provided. Various federal agencies, including the bodies responsible for enforcing HIPAA, have done a nice job at providing guidance for incident and breach response. Such materials can be referenced by your incident response plan as a resource for current guidance on specific decision points. These are also great tools because someone else maintains them. This comes in very handy when it's time to review and update your incident response plan. We talked about the need to differentiate between incidents and breaches. Likewise, the plan must identify the different types of incidents and breaches relevant to the organization. Looking at breaches first, how you respond to a breach of protected health information may vary if that health information is also mental health information. Likewise, if the data contains credit card information in addition to health information, you may have additional reporting requirements for PCI. When looking at incident types, key is to break out not just the types of incidents, but also combinations of incident types for which you'll have similar actions. These are typically segmented into broad categories such as social engineering, with a general response plan for the category and then more granular details for specific types of social engineering, such as email phishing versus a suspicious call to the help desk asking for a password reset. Prioritization is the key here. You can easily get bogged down in considering every possible scenario, but take the time as an organization to evaluate your biggest risks and how various types of incidents and breaches could contribute to those risks. Then invest the majority of your time for incident response planning on those high-risk areas. The breach reporting process can be one of the most complex aspects of your incident response plan, especially if you are geographically diverse. The first step is always identifying the regulations which may impact you. Keep in mind that it isn't just a question of where you are, but also what type of data may be involved. In addition to HIPAA, you may have regulatory requirements for various federal, state, and local requirements. If you're a teaching hospital, you may have a FERPA breach for the same incident that resulted in a HIPAA breach. The tip here is to ensure that your incident response plan isn't specific to one regulation. Whatever you do, please, for my personal sanity, don't create a separate incident response or breach response plan specific to every regulation. Taking a holistic approach to incident response that details out variations for specific regulations is much easier to maintain and will yield much more consistency than individual documents. If that sounds like too much to take on to start, design your plan around a particular framework such as NIST best practices and add in regulation-specific aspects one at a time. Once you get your first one done, you'll find that the rest go much more quickly. Once you have your potential reporting requirements defined, mapping out the reporting process for each is the next step. Organizations often need multiple departments to provide information to the report. In many cases, the organization's senior leadership also wants to perform extensive internal reviews and iterations before any reports are formally submitted. Both of these make meeting the regulated reporting timelines challenging, and a workflow documented in advance is the only way to go. If your organization is of sufficient size to have workflow tools available, implementing these processes into these tools is a great idea. Here's some more information that you can reference in the slides after the webinar. All HIPAA breach reporting is performed online via a fairly simple series of web forms. Completing the OCR's breach report is actually one of the more straightforward aspects of the incident response process. The hard work is ensuring your processes capture the appropriate information in a timely manner. That and obtaining those internal approvals on what is actually to be submitted. We'll cover the next few slides very quickly, but I just wanted to show you how straightforward the HIPAA breach reporting application actually is via some screenshots from the web application. The first tab of the website has you identify whether this is an initial report or an addendum to a previous report. The next tab, which you can see on your screen, is basic organizational contact information. So you'll identify whether you were a covered entity or a business associate and your basic contact information. The next tab is the breach tab. You can see the first half of that page on this slide. Here's where you'll identify how many individuals were impacted and the dates of both the breach and discovery of the breach. Now, keeping in mind that HIPAA requires reporting within certain timelines, but even if you don't meet the reported timeline requirements, do not fudge your numbers here. It's much better to report accurate information. On the bottom half of the breach page, you'll categorize the type of PHI that was involved in the breach, and depending upon what you select here, you'll receive some subcategory lists. The last section on the breach tab asks you for what safeguards were in place prior to the breach. Again, you'll be best served to report accurate information here. Most organizations are in the partial category for most of these, so this is a great opportunity to involve your legal counsel for whether a particular safeguard should receive a check mark or not. Of course, having previously conducted a HIPAA risk assessment is an easy way to have documentation to back up your response. While the web application is pretty straightforward, this tab and the next will be much easier to complete if your incident response plan is effective. The last content tab is the Notice of Breach and Actions Taken. This is where you'll report what notification was performed and identify any changes your organization has made as a result of the breach in order to prevent subsequent breaches. This is a very interesting tab for those who are promoting IT security and compliance investment within the organization, and because showing that the OCR is asking for what the organization has done can be an effective communication tool to your management and may help you push forward some initiatives that you see here on the list. The attestation page simply has you agree that this information is accurate to the best of your knowledge, and then the summary tab you can see will provide you a summary of all the information that you've submitted and give you a button to actually submit the report. This is online. It does not require a login, so you can feel free to go and play with this tool as you would like. As we mentioned previously, the most significant way organizations can reduce their risk of data breaches is by establishing a culture that takes data security and privacy seriously. One outcome of such a culture is an effective incident response program. By that I mean an incident response program which actually reduces risk. Employee engagement is the best indicator of organizational culture, and in terms of incident response, that boils down to ensuring employees know why security and privacy are important, that they understand what threats they may encounter, and that they have the ability to report suspicious activity to someone who can investigate it. Let me give you those three again. Employee engagement is the best indicator of organizational culture in terms of incident response, and that boils down to ensuring employees know why security and privacy are important, they understand what threats they may encounter, and that they have the ability to report suspicious activity to someone who can investigate it. There are some great things being done in this area, especially when it comes to email phishing, that are shifting organizations from punitive actions against employees to recognizing and rewarding employees for identifying threats. For example, some tools are now available that make reporting a suspicious email as simple as clicking a button within your email tool, such as Outlook. Going back to that Anthem example, if your IT or your security team can be notified of such threats, they may be able to prevent a breach from occurring. Some organizations are encouraging their staff to actively look for such threats and to report them with programs such as conducting a drawing for all incidents reported in a month or a quarter and giving out bounties or rewards to employees for reporting such incidents. In short, ensure your employees are seen as having a role in incident response process. As we saw with the Anthem breach, employees can be the best frontline defense against breaches. I'm going to hit on the theme of establishing a culture of data security and privacy one more time, this time in terms of making your incident response plan a living document. Get proactive tasks scheduled with all cross-departmental teams well in advance, including a quarterly review of security incidents. Simply reviewing the security incidents that have occurred in your organization is a powerful way to make security and privacy a part of your culture, and it helps the organization become familiar with the types of threats they are most likely to encounter. Of course, this information will help the organization make better decisions on how to train staff, and thus making your training more impactful because you can describe how it relates to the real-world threats that your organization is facing. This information can also be used to prioritize your investment in security and privacy practices by allowing you to focus on those areas of the highest risk. Again, these ongoing proactive tasks will go a long way to establishing the right culture and help ensure your incident response team is ready to address incidents, whether they are breaches or not, in a timely, efficient manner. That will bring us to our Q&A. And while Scott queues up any questions, you are probably wondering about the image on your screen. For one, it always generates questions, which is good for a Q&A slide. For those of you who are Star Wars fans, you know that Yoda has all the answers. And for those of you who are dog people, you'll just appreciate the image whether you have any questions or not. Scott, do we have any questions today?
Yes, sir. We do have one. The question is the process the same if the information was paper-related and not electronic? For example, If something is erroneously mailed to the wrong patient, is this considered a security breach for which notification and reporting is required?
Yeah, as we talked about, breaches can be both paper or electronic. You can have a breach of just having paper records exposed in a way that is defined as a breach. Again, this is a great opportunity for particular cases, such as you mailed one particular health record incorrectly, or you faxed one incorrectly. Great opportunity to involve your legal team to understand whether that particular incident is going to be defined as a breach for your particular organization, and if it is defined as a breach, whether notification is actually required. So I know that doesn't fully answer the question for that one particular example, but that process of engaging your legal team to review incidents, determine if a breach was made, and going through that decision tree about whether reporting is required is really the process that you want to follow. But you very much can and very often do have paper breaches in addition to electronic breaches.
Patrick, that was our only question. I want to thank you very, very much for serving as our presenter today. Great presentation. Attendees, I want to thank you as well. Please consider signing up for future CSOHIMSS webinars. And Patrick, thank you again.
All right, thank you.